A deafening crack tore through the frozen night. Ethan jolted, both hands clamping down on the steering wheel. His heart pounded furiously, as if it might burst from his chest. Ahead, under the dim beam of his headlights, through the blizzard's haze, the truck suddenly lurched. Its front left tire exploded, shards of rubber spraying outward like frantic arrows stabbing into the dark. On the deserted mountain pass, blanketed in snow, that sharp, brutal sound rang out like fate itself, delivering a warning. It all happened in an instant. The massive truck swerved out of control, veering into their lane. The headlights swallowed the space ahead, searing Ethan's vision. He clenched his jaw, yanked the wheel hard, forcing his SUV into the narrow gap between the snowbank and the truck's body. The tires slid over a thin sheet of ice, screeching in a sound that scraped at the nerves. The steering wheel shuddered violently in his grip, the jolt numbing his arms. The wind howled, whipping spirals of snow against the windshield like 100 blades. Crash! A metallic shriek split the night. The SUV's front end scraped along the truck's side, sparks bursting cold and bright. The impact flung the SUV sideways, the seats tilting sharply, the seatbelt slicing across Ethan's chest in a flash of pain. Light, darkness, and countless shards of glass whirled together into a blinding storm. The vehicle spun to a halt at the cliff's edge, its front half buried in a mound of roadside snow. Outside, the blizzard still raged, as if the world had no idea that just seconds ago, 2 lives had nearly been erased. "Lily," Ethan shouted, instantly turning to the woman in the passenger seat. She sat motionless, the seatbelt pinning her slender frame. Her hair was tangled, a few strands stuck to her forehead, beside a thin trickle of blood. Lily's eyes were wide open, but her gaze was vacant, unfocused, as if trying to grasp the shape of something that had just vanished. A freezing chill shot down Ethan's spine, not only from the night wind pouring into the shattered cabin, but from the sudden, crushing fear of losing her. "Can you hear me?" "Lily, stay with me." His voice broke, panic rising until he barely recognized himself. Lily didn't react. She only stared at him, those deep eyes utterly still, before her lashes lowered in a slow, heavy blink. "No, don't close your eyes, Lily." Ethan's voice rose to a near scream. He reached for her, chest tightening in dread, fumbling to unbuckle her seatbelt before pressing his gloved hand against her cheek. Through the fabric, he felt her skin cold, fragile, frighteningly still. A faint wisp of white escaped her lips, as fleeting as a fragile, desperate breath. Outside, snow kept falling thick and fast. Each flake landed on the windshield only to melt instantly, leaving thin rivulets sliding down like tears. The pass lay silent. Without a single other car, there was only them, the crumpled SUV and the frozen night. Ethan clutched Lily's icy hand, willing warmth into her. He leaned close, whispering urgently, "I'm here. You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine." Only a few hours earlier, this road had been calm, almost gentle. They had just left Willow Creek Lodge, its warm yellow lights glowing after a meeting with the manager about the wedding venue they would have in just a few months. In the pocket of Ethan's coat, the small blue velvet box still lay unopened. No one had expected the storm to arrive early, or that a single, sharp explosion could erase the line between soon and forever. From a distance, the wail of rescue sirens pierced through the storm. Through the whiteout, red and blue lights flickered into view. Ethan lifted his head, the flashing reflections caught in his dazed eyes. He turned back to Lily. She still slumped silently, lashes resting motionless against her pale cheek. And in that moment, a twisting, breath-stealing despair gripped his chest. The fear of losing her, not just tonight, but forever. The wail of the ambulance siren still roared in Ethan's ears as the doors slammed shut. Inside the cramped compartment, thick with the sharp scent of antiseptic, other images suddenly surged through him, sweet fragments of memory that had lain dormant for 2 long years. It had all begun at St. Mary's Hospital during a bleak, lingering autumn. Margaret, Ethan's only living grandmother, had just undergone a complex heart surgery. She was a special patient, known by nearly every nurse in the ward, not for her wealth, but because she always wore a smile, spoke with everyone, and remembered each of their names. Lily Harper, newly transferred to the internal medicine ward at the time, was among the few nurses Margaret trusted most. A petite young woman with her hair always neatly tied back. She had a voice so warm, it could melt the chill clinging to the fogged-up window panes. Lily didn't just carry out her duties delivering medicine or checking pulses before slipping away. She lingered to straighten blankets, adjust pillows for comfort, and tell a gentle story to chase away the loneliness of a hospital room. Ethan remembered vividly the first time he stepped into his grandmother's room. That day, he wore a perfectly tailored dark suit, a briefcase in hand, his mind cluttered with project deadlines. He had planned to stop by for only a few minutes before returning to a string of back-to-back meetings. But the moment he reached the doorway, he stopped short. Margaret beamed, tilting her head toward the young nurse carefully tucking the blanket around her. Catching her grandson's startled gaze, she teased softly, "You know, this nurse doesn't just bring medicine and go. She knows how to make the whole room feel less cold." Only then did Ethan truly notice Lily. For the first time, he looked directly into her deep brown eyes, a calm gaze, unflinching before the presence of a well-known man, showing neither curiosity nor awe, just quiet steadiness, as if she had witnessed so much pain that she had no need to judge anyone too quickly. After that, Ethan began visiting the hospital more often. At first, he told himself it was to check on his grandmother's health, but gradually, he found himself watching Lily more than the attending physician. He quietly observed the way she patiently repeated the same answer a dozen times to an elderly man with dementia, never losing her smile. He noticed how she brought Margaret a cup of hot chamomile tea after dinner, gently reminding her, "Be careful, it's hot." Ethan never said it out loud, but for the first time in years, he stayed at the hospital longer than planned, just to be near those two women, the one who had raised him, and the one who made him want to stay a little longer. That winter came early, one late night. With the hospital corridors silent, Lily stood by the far window, quietly watching the first snow of the season fall over the courtyard. Ethan appeared beside her, still in his suit, though the usual air of busyness had softened. He stood in silence, side by side, gazing with her at the hazy parking lot below. Only after a while did he speak, his voice low. "My grandmother talks about you a lot." Lily turned, eyes clear. "All good things, or some bad ones too." Ethan smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Only good things," she said. "You remind her of things she'd forgotten." In that moment, Ethan's simple words caught Lily off guard. To her, it wasn't just a compliment. It was like a door cracking open, giving her a glimpse of the man behind the composed exterior. A man who had lived a lifetime without the warmth of family, to the point where he borrowed other people's memories to fill his own emptiness. Their bond didn't come in a sudden blaze, but seeped in through countless small gestures, like the time Ethan quietly brought Lily a bag of crisp red apples after hearing from Margaret that she liked to bake, or the night he waited outside the hospital in heavy snow, without calling ahead, just to make sure she got home safely. Lily loved Ethan, not for the halo surrounding the owner of the high-end Walker's Table restaurant chain, nor for the millions attached to his name in financial reports. She loved him because she understood a resilient but lonely heart, a man who knew how to fight, but had never learned how to lean on anyone, and she wanted to be the place he could rest, even if only once. The sweetness of the memory vanished as Ethan was jolted back to the brutal present. In the ambulance, the steady beep of Lily's heart monitor filled the space, each sound striking his panic-stricken mind like a hammer blow. Ethan bowed his head, gripping her icy hand on the stretcher. He knew if he lost her, he would lose the only thing that had ever made him believe there was a place for him in this world. Outside contracts and soulless boardrooms, beyond the fogged window, the blizzard still raged. But inside Ethan, the fiercest storm had been brewing since 2 years ago, the day he first met Lily at St. Mary's. The wail of the ambulance seemed to linger in the air, even as Ethan sat motionless on the cold bench outside the emergency room. The sharp, acrid scent of antiseptic filled his lungs, pressing heavier on his chest. Down the long corridor, bathed in the harsh glow of neon lights, white-coated figures moved swiftly, the thud of rubber soles striking the tile floor in urgent rhythm. Ethan kept his head bowed, fingers tightly interlaced, his bloodshot eyes fixed on the closed doors of the operating room as if staring long enough might make them open. And Lily would step out smiling, assuring him this was all just a bad dream. But the doors stayed shut. Time crawled forward, each minute stretching into an eternity. At last, a doctor emerged, pulling down his mask to reveal a face etched with exhaustion. He approached Ethan, his voice calm but weighted with sorrow. "She suffered a brain injury. We've treated the external trauma, but when it comes to the brain, it's too early to say. We'll need to keep monitoring. You should prepare yourself for all possibilities." Prepare yourself, 2 words that fell with a cold, merciless weight, like an unspoken sentence. Ethan stood frozen, managing only a nod of thanks before collapsing back into the chair. His hands clenched so tightly they turned white. Prepare yourself meant no one knew what would happen. It meant each passing second became a trial of dread and uncertainty. The days that followed were the longest of Ethan's life. Each morning, he was at the hospital before dawn, sitting silently in the chair beside Lily's bed, his eyes never leaving her face. She lay there, deep in a coma, like a sleeping princess in a fairy tale he tried to retell to himself. He spoke to her softly, as if she might hear, telling her the sun had peeked out a little that day, that the snow on the glass roof had stopped falling overnight, that the cafe across the street had changed its blend. He spoke not only for her, but to steady himself, to cling to the hope that one day she would open her eyes, smile, and answer him back. And then, on a morning colder than usual, the last miracle came. A young nurse stepped gently into the corridor, touching Ethan's shoulder. "She's awake, but you should be prepared." Ethan's heart tightened. He shot to his feet, following the nurse into the room, a rush of joy tangled with dread rising inside him. Pale morning light flooded the room, spilling across the curtain that swayed gently. Lily lay there, her face drained of color, a few strands of hair slipping across the white bandage on her forehead. Her eyes were open, but her gaze was vacant and distant. When Ethan moved closer, those eyes landed on his face without a flicker of recognition, only cautious scrutiny, as if she were looking at a stranger. "Lily!" Ethan's voice cracked. She blinked a few times, her lips parting. "I'm sorry, you are." The space between them seemed to freeze solid. Ethan stood rooted, his chest constricting as if gripped by invisible hands. He swallowed hard, speaking in a tremor. I'm Ethan." Lily frowned slightly, repeating the name in silence, as if searching for it in some dark, locked room in her memory. But then, she gave up, shaking her head helplessly. Just then, there was a knock at the door. The same doctor from earlier stepped in with a nurse. He glanced at Ethan, then spoke gently to Lily. "It appears you've experienced partial memory loss, something we anticipated might happen. It seems that for now, the last 5 years are missing. Everything that happened during that time, including close relationships, has been erased from your memory." Each word cut like a blade. A dull roar filled Ethan's head. 5 years, the exact span of time they had been together, which meant that to her now, he was nothing more than a stranger who had just stepped into her life. Ethan's lips moved, but no words came. Lily quietly turned her face toward the window, where the last snowflakes of the season drifted down. The sky hung heavy and gray, just like the night of the storm. Suddenly, the door swung open again. Along with the chill of outside air came the rich scent of coffee. A tall man in a gray overcoat strode quickly to the bed, his deep voice warm but entirely at ease. "Lily, I brought you your favorite." Lily looked up at him, still wearing that dazed expression. He bent down, placing a steaming latte in her hands, then smiled gently, turning to Ethan, who still stood frozen. The man gave a polite nod. There was a glint in his eyes difficult to read, and a faint, practiced smile on his lips. Ethan's heart sank. He recognized the man, Mark Reynolds, Lily's former colleague at the hospital. His arrival here, at this fragile moment, only deepened the weight in Ethan's chest. Outside the window, The east wind howled in long, sharp gusts, as if whispering that another storm was on its way. The heavy, gray sky of late winter hung low over the city. From the 32nd floor of the Maddox Holdings Tower, Ethan stood motionless by the office window, eyes fixed on the slow crawl of cars, inching along a salt-dusted road below. From this height, everything looked so small and distant, exactly how his life felt to him now. Since the day Lily was discharged from the hospital, an invisible wall had stood between them, transparent, but cold and untouchable. Lily no longer remembered him. She didn't remember the nights he waited outside the hospital for her shift to end, the quiet afternoons he sat in her small studio, watching her lose herself in each brushstroke, or the simple, heartfelt proposal by the lakeside last summer. To Lily now, Ethan was nothing more than a stranger's name. The first day Ethan visited after Lily returned to her apartment, she greeted him with the polite smile of a nurse welcoming a patient's family member. Her eyes were clear and calm, without the slightest trace of hesitation or emotion. Sitting in the very living room, where they had once shared countless memories, Ethan felt himself turn into an intruder in his own life. Their conversation was halting, strained. When he finally dared to bring up the wedding they had once planned together, Lily paused. She set her teacup down, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm sorry, but I can't marry someone I don't remember and don't love." The refusal fell between them like a thin blade, severing the last fragile thread Ethan had clung to. He forced a smile, nodded, and didn't try to argue because he knew she had every reason. But as he turned and stepped through the doorway, it felt as if the entire world behind him was quietly collapsing. In the days that followed, Ethan buried himself in work like a man seeking shelter. Meetings for the expansion of the Walker's Table restaurant chain into the European market came one after another, and the London partners pressed relentlessly, eager to finalize contracts before summer. Under the bright lights of the boardroom, Ethan sat listening, taking notes, speaking when necessary. But his thoughts kept drifting to the other side of the city, where Lily was beginning a new life without him. Every night after work, Ethan drove aimlessly through the familiar snow-covered streets. Almost every night, he found himself passing the small apartment building where Lily lived. He never stopped, only slowed down, looking up at the familiar second-floor window where warm yellow light spilled out through the gap in the curtains. Once, he caught a glimpse of her shadow on the curtain. It looked as if she were laughing with someone. Perhaps a colleague from the hospital had stopped by. His chest tightened, his foot hovering over the gas pedal as if to stop. But in the end, Ethan kept driving, letting his car melt back into the crowded streets, as if he had never been there at all. Ethan tried to force his mind back to work, but cracks began to show. He missed important emails, mixed up meeting times, even forgot an appointment with a major partner. One late afternoon, his phone rang. It was Richard Hale, his strategic partner in London. The moment Ethan lifted the phone to his ear, Richard's voice came sharp and cold as steel. "Ethan, I need you fully focused. This is a $100 million deal. We can't let personal feelings get in the way." Outside the office window, the city still churned with restless motion. But inside Ethan, everything seemed to stand still. He set the phone down on the desk, an empty feeling stretching out across him, like the lengthening shadow of dusk on the floor. Ethan knew that all this turmoil was only the beginning of a change he had never imagined. A light spring drizzle blurred the streets, leaving scattered watermarks across the window of the small roadside cafe. Lily sat at a table by the window, hands wrapped around a warm latte, eyes following the hurried flow of people outside. The small scar at her temple had yet to fade, flaring red whenever the weather shifted, a quiet reminder of the blizzard night accident. The cafe door opened softly, bringing with it a rush of cold air and the rich scent of freshly ground coffee. Mark Reynolds stepped in, his gray overcoat speckled with raindrops, smiling. He set a steaming cappuccino in front of Lily. "I figured you could use something a little warmer." Lily returned the smile. "Thank you." A pleasant silence passed between them. Mark was a former colleague from the hospital, someone Lily only vaguely remembered through a few photos on her phone and stories from coworkers. He didn't rush to ask about her accident or her memory. Instead, he spoke slowly, sharing light-hearted anecdotes from the ward, weaving in fragments of the time Lily was still struggling to piece together. You know, Mark set his spoon down, lifting his gaze to hers, a fleeting shadow crossing his eyes. Ethan's a man with vision, but also practical. He always knows exactly what he wants, and he never takes a step unless he's certain he'll win. Lily frowned slightly. You mean, in business? Mark shrugged. In everything. I'm not saying he's a bad man, just hard to predict. A person like that, if he's put you in his plan, you'll stay there. But if not, he left the sentence hanging, smiling as if that was all there was to say. Outside, the last dandelion tufts of the season swirled in the wind. Pressing against the cafe window beside Lily, she suddenly remembered how, one day at the hospital, a dried dandelion stem had been trapped between the double panes of a corridor window, unable to fly away, unable to return to the soil. A strange, airless tightness rose in her chest. Lily had spent weeks trying to stitch her memories back together through photographs, old journal entries, and stories from Margaret. Yet now, Mark's vague words planted new, uneasy gaps in her mind. She hated the feeling of being led like this, not because Mark had said anything concrete, but because his unfinished hints forced her to fill in the spaces herself. The phone on the table buzzed softly. The screen lit up with the name Ethan. Lily glanced at it, hesitating for a moment before silencing the call. Mark noticed but said nothing, only sipping his cappuccino quietly, his expression unreadable. At that very moment, across the street, a sleek black SUV pulled up at a red light. Behind the wheel, Ethan was on his way to take Lily to lunch, as he had once done out of habit. But with one accidental turn of his head, he saw her, through the rain-speckled glass. The scene unfolded: Lily and Mark sitting across from each other, close and comfortable in a way that should have been harmless, except for the faint smile on Lily's lips and the way she tilted her head, listening intently to the man in front of her. A chill ran down Ethan's spine, not from the drizzle outside, but from the realization that the distance between him and Lily was no longer measured only in lost memories, but also in what was happening right before his eyes. The blare of a horn sounded behind him. The light turned green. Ethan swallowed hard and pressed the accelerator. The SUV rolled forward, leaving the familiar intersection behind. But the image in that cafe had already carved itself deep into his mind. And somewhere in the depths of him, a primal fear stirred, fear of losing her all over again, and this time, forever. The morning in New York was gray, as if coated in a thin layer of ash. In the silent conference room on the 45th floor of Maddox Holdings, cold ceiling lights cast a pale glow across the polished surface of the long meeting table. On the screen, the tense face of Richard Hale, strategic partner in London, stared back. Ethan, I've made myself very clear. Richard's voice came through the speakers. Even and ice cold. We need you in Europe for at least a month to finalize every agreement in person. If you change plans at the last minute, I'll have to reconsider the entire partnership. This is not a game. Ethan leaned back in his chair, gray eyes fixed on Richard's image. Fatigue lined the corners of his gaze, but his expression remained unnervingly calm. Richard narrowed his eyes slightly. I put my trust in someone who always knew how to prioritize his objectives. But now, I'm not so sure. Are you still the Ethan Maddox I once knew? For a moment, silence filled the room. Outside the glass wall, the sky was heavy and sunless, thick gray clouds drifting slowly. Ethan felt as though he were standing at a crossroads in the middle of a storm. Ahead lay the chance to expand a business empire worth hundreds of millions. Behind him, Lily, the woman who had returned to his life, but could just as easily walk away again. The image of Lily by the cafe window flashed in his mind, along with that ice-cold grip tightening around his chest. He had lost his parents young, growing up in unfamiliar houses where dinners passed in silence, and the eyes around him always turned away. He once believed that wealth and success could fill that emptiness, until he met Lily. Ethan drew in a deep breath, his hand unconsciously resting on the cool wood of the table. Grounding himself, his heartbeat steadied, and he knew exactly what he would say. Richard, he began, his voice low and certain, if getting this deal means losing the woman I love, It's not worth it. On the other side of the screen, Richard froze. Do you realize what you're saying? This is a project we've prepared for over a year. And I also realize, Ethan cut in, his tone still calm but resolute, that beyond money and prestige, I'm missing something far more important. If I leave New York for a month, when I come back, she might not be here anymore. I can't let that happen. A long silence followed. Richard leaned back, his eyes dark with a mix of anger and disbelief. Finally, he exhaled sharply. I hope you won't regret this. Then the screen went black, leaving only the dark reflection of Ethan's thoughtful face. He sat there for a few more seconds, listening to the fading hum in the speakers. Then, slowly, he closed the laptop in front of him, rising from his chair. He grabbed the suit jacket draped over the backrest and walked out of the vast conference room. Everything he had built might collapse because of this decision. But to Ethan, that loss was nothing compared to losing Lily not again. Late afternoon slowly settled over the city, draping the tall buildings in a pale golden light. Instead of driving straight back to his cold penthouse in the heart of Manhattan, Ethan steered his car out of the city, passing through old neighborhoods he hadn't set foot in for years. Faded shop signs, dull brown brick walls, and cracked sidewalks, all of it pulled at memories of a time he had always wanted to forget. The narrow road to Havenbrook Orphanage was silent, flanked by rows of bare trees reaching their branches into the gray sky. Ethan pushed open the rusty iron gate, its hinges groaning. At once, the scent of old wood and cheap soap filled his senses, pulling him back into distant memories. The orphanage's main hall was still painted in peeling beige, patches of gray plaster exposed beneath. In one corner of the familiar lounge sat the old, worn-out sofa where young Ethan used to curl up, clutching the borrowed wool blanket from the home. He remembered winter nights when the wind howled outside the window, the sound of footsteps fading farther and farther away, leaving behind a cold room and a small boy who no one ever came to take home. Suddenly, a bright, ringing laugh echoed from the far end of the hallway, snapping him back to the present. Ethan turned to see a boy of about 7 sitting cross-legged on the floor, engrossed with a battered toy piano. The boy's eyes sparkled, but deep within them was a vast emptiness. The gaze of a child still hoping someone would come and call him home. Ethan froze, unwilling to break the boy's moment. For an instant, the child's image overlapped with his own younger self. He had left this place with nothing, carrying a vow never to look back. Yet standing here now, surrounded by these walls of memory, Ethan finally understood why he had needed to return to remember where he began, and to ask himself what truly mattered. He had sat in the finest restaurants, where wine swirled in crystal glasses and piano music drowned every pause. But in those glittering places, he had never felt he belonged. Here, despite the peeling paint and creaking floorboards, he knew at least that he had once existed and grown on his own 2 feet. A quiet thought slid into his mind. If success still meant being alone, with no one to call family, then what exactly had he won? The sun had vanished completely when Ethan stepped out of Havenbrook's gate. Standing by his car, he pulled out his phone and began typing a long message to Richard Hale. It was an apology for not being able to travel to Europe as planned. For a personal reason too important to delay, the message ended with a firm promise. Any extra costs or losses caused by this delay, I will take full responsibility for. I hope you'll cooperate to minimize the impact. Right after, he called Marianne, his trusted assistant of many years, and handed her full control of the project in his absence. His voice was low, decisive. If there's a loss, I'll take it, not them. Ending the call, Ethan stood still on the sidewalk, exhaling a long breath. In his heart, everything was clearer than ever. For weeks, Ethan had tried every gentle way he could to help Lily regain her memories, from taking her to places they had once been, to playing the music she used to love, to quietly placing mementos where she might see them. Yet her memories of him remained a vast, empty space. Ethan felt like he was standing at a crossroads. He didn't want to push Lily too hard, but he couldn't simply stand by and watch her drift farther away. One late afternoon, as the shadows stretched long across the garden, he drove out to the red brick house of Margaret. The air was sweet with the scent of freshly baked apple pie, When the old wooden door creaked open, Margaret appeared with her gentle smile, though her eyes gleamed with sharp clarity. They sat together in the small kitchen, bathed in the amber glow of sunset. Ethan cupped his hands around the steaming mug of tea she'd poured for him, hesitating as if afraid to meet her knowing gaze. "I've tried everything I can think of," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "But it's like every time I take one step forward, she takes two back. I don't want to scare Lily, but if it keeps going like this, she might never remember who I am." Margaret didn't answer right away. She simply blew lightly across the surface of her tea, letting the delicate steam rise between them, creating a needed pause. After a moment, she gently laid her thin, weathered hand over his. "Ethan," she said softly, "you love that girl enough to be patient. But sometimes, helping someone find their way back to their memories takes more than patience. It takes a touch that reaches straight to the heart." Ethan looked up, meeting her wrinkled but shining eyes. For the first time in weeks, a small spark of hope stirred in him. "You know how, don't you?" Margaret smiled, a warm, faintly mysterious smile. "I think there's something that might remind Lily of who she used to be, and of who's been quietly standing behind her all this time." The next morning, Lily was bent over, sorting through the paintings in her small art shop. When the glass door chimed softly, Margaret stepped inside, carrying a large frame carefully wrapped in brown paper. Morning sunlight slanted through the front window, casting a warm streak across the wooden floor, where a few newly painted canvases leaned against the wall, waiting to be hung. Lily looked up, a little surprised to see her. She quickly stepped forward. "Hello. Did you come to see me?" Margaret nodded, her hands tightening slightly around the frame as if holding something fragile and precious. "Do you have a few minutes for me?" Her voice was low and gentle, yet carried something that made Lily grow solemn as well. They sat across from each other on the small sofa in the corner of the shop, the stillness broken only by the ticking of a pendulum clock and the faint aroma of coffee from Lily's half-finished cup. Margaret set the frame on the table, carefully peeling away the wrapping paper. Inside was a framed piece of pressed dandelions, mounted in simple wood. The thin white petals fanned outward as if caught in the wind, yet were frozen forever in the flat stillness behind glass. "Do you recognize it?" Margaret asked, her kind eyes resting on Lily. Lily gently brushed her fingertips over the glass. Her heart gave an inexplicable tremor. "I think this was the first piece I ever sold. But why is it here with you?" Margaret smiled, a warmth tinged with wistfulness. "Because it never really left you. Someone bought it and hung it in his workplace, not to show it off, but to remind himself that out there was a girl who, despite a hard life, still had the courage to send her dreams out into the world." Lily's gaze sharpened, her heartbeat quickening. Margaret drew in a steady breath and continued, slow and deliberate, "That someone was Ethan. But he never told you, because he didn't want you to feel pressured. He only wanted you to know that you have worth. And that there has always been someone who believed in that, even when you didn't." A sudden warmth flooded Lily's chest. In that moment, countless flickers of emotion began connecting, piece by piece. She remembered the softness in Ethan's eyes when she smiled at her art exhibit, the way he quietly straightened a crooked frame without saying a word, the times he endured her misunderstandings without defending himself. Scattered memories, once meaningless, were now finding their place. Outside, a gentle spring breeze swept along the sidewalk, carrying a few dandelion seeds into the blue sky. Lily sat in silence, her hand still resting on the pressed flowers, feeling the quiet devotion preserved in every delicate petal. That afternoon, when Mark stopped by the shop with 2 coffees as he often did, Lily was already waiting. She stood to face him, her deep brown eyes unwavering. Before he could say a word, she spoke, her tone even, but cold. "Half a loaf of bread is still bread, but half the truth isn't the truth." Mark froze in the doorway, his hand around the coffee cup trembling slightly. He opened his mouth to say something, but the sharp edge in Lily's gaze left his explanation lodged in his throat. At last, he managed a faint, awkward smile, set the 2 cups down on the counter, and left without another word, closing the shop in absolute silence. That night, Walker's table was quieter than usual. Soft amber light from the overhead lamps spilled onto the dark wood bar, glinting off crystal glasses still cool to the touch. The faint scent of thyme and browned butter drifted from the kitchen, mingling with the gentle trace of red wine in the air. In the corner by the fireplace, Ethan sat quietly at the small grand piano. He had never been a polished musician. His fingers sometimes hesitated over the keys, but every note he played was steeped in unspoken emotion. There was no sheet music in front of him. He played from memory and from the heart, each slow phrase like a wordless confession, hoping someone might understand. From behind a wooden pillar across the room, Lily watched him, her gaze fixed on the awkward yet sincere movements of his hands. Her heart stirred, with a feeling she could barely name, part ache, part warmth. When the nameless melody ended, she stepped forward and gently took the seat beside him. Ethan turned, startled to see her there at this hour. She gave a faint smile, her voice soft but steady. "I still don't remember everything, but when I'm with you, I feel at peace." Ethan looked deep into her brown eyes, and the corners of his mouth curved into a quiet smile. Peace, just one word, yet enough to last him the rest of his life. His phone buzzed atop the piano. On the screen, "Richard Hale, overseas deal." Ethan opened the message, scanning each line quickly. As he expected, the partners had pulled their funding. The expansion plan for the restaurant chain was officially dead. He set the phone down, closed his eyes, and exhaled a long breath. Then he gave a slow nod, as if placing the final stone on a decision long made. When he opened his eyes, they were lighter, freer, not the eyes of a defeated man, but of one who had chosen the right road. Days later, the Maddox Holdings boardroom buzzed with tense chatter. Outside, the press had already caught the scent of the failed expansion deal, and anxious eyes turned toward Ethan, standing at the head of the table, dressed sharply. His expression was so calm it surprised many. In a firm, unwavering voice, he announced, "We will establish a culinary training fund for orphans. If what I lacked as a child can become something someone else receives today, then even losing a project means we're still investing in the right place." Murmurs rippled through the room. Some frowned at the loss. Others gave quiet nods. Ethan didn't need unanimous approval. He only knew that this time, he wouldn't miss the chance to become the man someone once believed he could be. News of his decision spread quickly. Among the first to read the headline was Lily, but she didn't see it as a publicity stunt by a businessman. She saw the man who had once quietly bought her first painting, not to flaunt it, but to remind himself that fragile things in life are still worth cherishing. Weeks later, Lily's art exhibition Wind on Snow opened on an early winter afternoon. Silvery light filled the gallery, spilling across paintings lining the walls. At the center was a special empty space where Lily displayed her newest work, a different take on the dandelion theme. This time, the petals weren't pressed flat behind glass, but soared freely across the canvas, defying the headwind with resilience. Near the end of the event, a staff member approached Lily and whispered, "The centerpiece, it's just been sold." The payment was made under an anonymous name. Lily took the receipt, her eyes catching on the small signature line, "Margaret Hale." The next afternoon, Lily went to Margaret's home. The older woman opened the door with her familiar, generous smile. When Lily asked about the painting, Margaret simply placed a hand over hers, eyes warm with affection. "There are some things he does. I only help them along." Lily stood still. Memories might fade, but the qualities that had bound her heart to someone, the kindness, the steadfastness, had never left. That night, leaving her final gallery room, Lily looked up to see the season's first snow falling. Tiny flakes landed softly on her coat, melting instantly into cold drops. She pulled her scarf tighter, took out her phone, and dialed a familiar number. After just a few rings, the line picked up. Ethan's deep, warm voice came through. "I'm at Walker's table." The restaurant's back patio was warmed by a round fire pit in the middle of the wooden deck. The flames flickered, casting golden light across empty tables and the occasional snowflake drifting down. Ethan sat on a long bench, thick overcoat around his shoulders, hands held toward the fire for warmth. His breath rose in faint clouds in the frigid air. The door opened softly, and Lily stepped out. She paused, taking in the sight before her. The firelight on Ethan's quiet face, the gentle glow resting on shoulders that had once carried so much solitude. Her heart tightened. She walked toward him slowly, hearing her footsteps. Ethan turned. His gray eyes widened when he saw Lily. Tiny snowflakes caught in her hair. Lily drew a breath and spoke softly. I still don't remember it all, but I remember why I wanted to trust. If you still want to, Ethan rose, holding her gaze. I've always wanted that. Not for you to be who you were before, but for us to write a new chapter together. Lily smiled. She opened her bag, taking out a fresh sketch, 2 dandelions drifting side by side on the same wind. Handing it to him, she said gently, so you can place it anywhere you want. Ethan's hands trembled as he took it, his eyes stinging. He set the drawing aside, then clasped Lily's hand in his. They sat together, fingers interlaced, unyielding. Around them, the snow kept falling, but the fire between them was enough to chase away the cold. Money could buy the finest seat in a restaurant, but not the seat beside a heart. And the missing piece in Ethan's life, he realized, wasn't some dazzling new creation. It was a home. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts. And don't forget to follow and tap the bell so each week we can hear more stories of people choosing love over fear.